This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to The World Today. I'm Richard Nta in Nairobi. Here's what's ahead. Russia leaves the Open Skies Treaty that allows aerial surveillance a year after the United States abandoned the agreement. The death toll from Super Typhoon Rai in the Philippines rises to 21. And Europe's surge in COVID-19 cases continues, fueled by Omicron variant. Once again, welcome to The World Today. I'm Richard Nta. Let's begin in Russia, where the country has formally pulled out today of a treaty that was intended to build a trust between Moscow and the West. The Russian Foreign Ministry's announcement of the country's official withdrawal from the treaty on open skies comes nearly a year after it said it would quit the accord. The Kremlin has said that the United States' decision in 2020 to leave the treaty upset the balance of interest among the pact's members and compelled Russia to exit. The Treaty on Open Skies had allowed unarmed surveillance flights over 36 signatories. Russia had called on the U.S. to return to the treaty. Instead, the U.S. accused Russia of violating the pact, an accusation which Moscow denied. Well, Open Skies Treaty was signed in 1992 and entered into force in 2002. Participants allow unarmed aerial surveillance flights across their entire territory. Nations conducting an observation flight must provide 72 hours notice before arriving in the host country. Aircraft can be equipped with sensors that can collect basic information on military forces and their activities. Meanwhile, tensions are rising over a Russian military buildup on the Ukraine border. This comes as Moscow hit back at NATO and the U.S. for what it says were hostile actions. Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said that must stop.
Washington and its NATO allies need to immediately stop regular hostile actions against our country, including unscheduled war games, dangerous encounters, and maneuvers of military ships and planes, and end the military absorption of Ukrainian territory.
Moscow has repeatedly denied its plans to attack its neighbor. It also demands the West provide legal guarantees to put a stop to NATO's expansion to Ukraine and the deployment of weapons. But NATO has dismissed this. The Russian deputy foreign minister said Moscow is willing to negotiate with Washington in a third country. A senior U.S. official said they're prepared to discuss Russia's proposals, but will not compromise on principles that are the foundation of Europe's security. The European Union is also warning of more sanctions on Russia. The United Nations Human Rights Council has voted to launch fresh investigations into Ethiopia's conflict. The vote that took place on Friday will create an international team of experts to look deeper into human rights abuses during the unrest. Ethiopia's government forces have been engaged in battle with rebels from the northern Tigray region for months. Ethiopia has denounced the decision to set up a new inquiry into the war, citing that it had already cooperated in earlier probes. A three-person team with a year-long mandate is expected to carry out the exercise to monitor and report rights abuses in the country. The resolution has been backed by European nations and other Western countries. And to the Philippines now, where the death toll from Super Typhoon Rai has risen to 21. Typhoon Rai made landfall on Thursday. It was one of the strongest tropical storms to strike the nation this year. Over 300,000 people were displaced, homes were damaged, and power lines collapsed. Most deaths were caused by fallen trees and drowning. President Rodrigo Duterte says he will visit the battered central and southern areas today to assess the damage as the government prepares funds for disaster response. And at least 24 people have been killed by a building fire in Osaka. The fire spread from a clinic on the 4th floor of the 8-story building. Police are investigating the fire as a possible case of arson. A spokesperson says a man was entering the clinic with a bag of liquid that was set down next to a heater. We hear from witnesses who were at the scene during the fire.
When I saw it, I thought a small fire broke out, but then there was an unusual number of ambulances and fire trucks. The traffic lights were turned off too. I was really confused for a moment.
I used to come to this clinic, and there are many patients here. I'm very sad because many people died. I've laid flowers, and I wish they all rest in peace.
Well, 2 people have died and 20 others rescued after being trapped in a coal mine for almost 2 days in Shanxi province. The State Council is to oversee an investigation into the incident. Wang Mangjie tells us more.
The 20-year miner was brought to the surface, alive, Friday afternoon. All of the survivors were sent to the hospital for treatment.
We have a group of nurses for each of the miners and have performed a health checkup on them. The miners sent to the People's Hospital of Xiaoyi all have stable vital signs.
About 400 rescuers have been working around the clock. They located the trapped miners Friday morning and began lifting them out. Police say it's been a timely operation. Flooding occurred at an unauthorized coal mine in Duxigo village at around 11 p.m. on Wednesday. It is not an easy rescue mission as it is an illegal mine. The site is hidden and it is unclear about the coal mine structure and composition, which multiplies the difficulties for rescue work. A statement released by city government on Thursday says that police have detained 7 people involved in the operation of this time's coal mine flooding. Police have launched an investigation and are tracking down people involved in the illegal mining operation. They say 7 people have been detained. Wang Mengjie, CGTN, Xiaoyi, Shanxi Province.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has called the spike in Omicron cases scary. Several of the nation's 10 provinces reported big jumps of new infections as Omicron replaces Delta as the dominant variant. That as Health Minister Jean-Yves Duclos said Canada would lift a ban on travelers from 10 African countries that was imposed last month. In the neighboring United States, a coronavirus viral blizzard will hit in the next few weeks. Experts say millions of Americans will be affected by both the Omicron and Delta variants as holiday travel gets underway a week before Christmas. Top U.S. health officials now say Omicron is more transmissible than Delta. An American pharmaceutical firm, Pfizer, is forecasting that the COVID-19 pandemic will not end until 2024. The company expects some regions to continue to see pandemic levels of cases over the next year or two, and other countries will transition to endemic with low manageable caseloads. In Europe, countries are seeing surging cases. French authorities say Omicron will likely become dominant in the country by the start of next year. Wang Haiyang has the details.
Britain has reported record infections for the 3rd consecutive day, with over 93,000 new cases. Health authorities estimate the Omicron variant already accounts for more than 80% of new cases in London. In Ireland, all restaurants and bars must close at 8 p.m. starting Monday, though that excludes takeaway and delivery services. It's also banning indoor events after 8 p.m. except for wedding receptions. In the Netherlands, health experts have advised a strict lockdown to stem the spread of Omicron. That's after a partial lockdown was extended through January. And France says it will cut the recommended time between 2nd and 3rd vaccine shots to 4 months. People will be required to show proof of vaccination to enter some venues. Wang Haiyang, CGTN.
South Korea is restoring some COVID curbs as it battles surging infections. The country reported over 7,300 cases, the 4th consecutive day of new infections above 7,000. And for the first time, the number of patients needing critical care has topped 1,000. Jack Barton has more from Seoul.
Yeah, it's a big jump up from more than 1,000, up from around 200 at the start of the month. So really an exponential leap there. And doctors saying that there's normally a lag. So the true seriousness of the situation not likely to be felt for 2 to 3 weeks, but also medical associations and doctors here saying that that figure is likely to be conservative because as of November, the focus here has been on care at home. The government realizing that hospital beds are really at their capacity. But what the doctors are saying is that people are dying at home. There's almost 30 cases so far. And at the moment, they're really saying that the hospital beds are stretched to capacity. It's a problem for the COVID patients, but they say it's also a big problem for people that have critical issues that are not COVID related because they can't get into those intensive care units at the moment because they are being put aside for COVID patients. And according to the medical associations here, there's not really a good solution in sight at the moment. It has to be said, for the first time since the pandemic began here in South Korea, quite a bit of criticism beginning to grow about the government's handling of the reopening or the living with COVID phase. And what we're seeing is restaurants closing again at 9 p.m, takeout allowed after that, cafes the same, places where there's really sort of a dense crowding of people in, they've got to close at 9. Of course, a lot of nightclubs don't even open that early, so that's essentially suspending their activities and lots of other measures in place. Having said that, doctors again are saying it's too little too late.
Well, that's it for this edition of The World Today. I'll be back shortly with more news from the continent in Africa Live. Thanks for watching.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
Tents here. Bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Tear gas, so it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
This is the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from the
within
front
clear
line.
view of this front line position.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
UN forms panel to probe human rights abuses in Ethiopia as Ethiopia denounces decision. Tunisia marks 11 years since the Arab Spring as her neighbors Libya and Sudan struggle to find their footing. And the UN says thousands have fled their homes in Cameroon due to inter-communal violence. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at other stories making headlines this hour. In business, Ghana introduces new taxes on all electronic money payments. And in sports, authorities confident that Yangching Olympics Village is secure against pandemic spread. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. Great to have you along with me for this hour. Let's begin with the United Nations, where the Organization and Human Rights Council has voted to launch fresh investigations into Ethiopia's conflict. The vote that took place on Friday will create an international team of experts to look deeper into human rights abuses during the unrest. Ethiopia's government forces have been engaged in battle with rebels from the northern Tigray region for months. Ethiopia has denounced the decision to set up a new inquiry into the war, citing that it had already cooperated in earlier probes. A three-person team with a year-long mandate is expected to carry out the exercise to monitor and report rights abuses in the country. The resolution has been backed by European nations and other Western countries.
Meanwhile, the conflict has continued with ongoing fighting beyond the borders of Tigray. Our office continues to receive credible reports of severe human rights violations and abuses by all parties. The humanitarian impact of the conflict is increasingly dramatic. Acute food insecurity now affects more than 9.4 million people in northern Ethiopia, according to OCHA. Within Tigray, 5.2 million people, that is roughly 90% of the population, are in need. Only limited UN-organized humanitarian supplies have been able to enter Tigray since July, including food and vital medical supplies. In June, OCHA estimated that at least 400,000 people in Tigray were living in conditions of famine.
In light of the prolonged conflict situation and given the seriousness of the allegations, it is clear to us that the international community has to assume its responsibilities and that this Council has to fulfill its mandated role, including with regard to prevention. Mr. Vice President, this resolution and the mechanism it proposes are, in our view, a positive and necessary contribution and complementary addition to ongoing efforts for peace and justice for the people of Ethiopia.
We are appalled by the way some of the interventions were made before this August Assembly. They do not comprehend the gravity of the allegation they carry in misleading the international community. The accusations leveled against my country are unfounded and disregard the facts on the ground.
Well, let's bring in CGTN's Gurum Chala joining us from Addis Ababa. Gurum, thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. Gurum, Ethiopia is not happy with the decision to form a UN panel to probe alleged human rights abuses in the war in the north. What more can you tell us about Addis Ababa's response to this?
Good afternoon, Richard, from Addis Ababa, where the Ethiopian government has a few hours ago released a strong statement against the decisions made by the UN Human Rights Council. It reads, just a point, this action by some in the council is an attempt to find a way, an alternative way of meddling into internal affairs of the country and will not serve any purpose except exacerbating the situation on the ground, it reads. Richard, Ethiopia from the onset was rejecting this meeting, calling it unnecessary because it was working its own Human Rights Commission, which was very credible, by the way, was jointly working with the UN and had published a report which was accepted by many member states before, and that was expected to be implemented. However, now the decision was made. As you remember, so many African states were not even happy of the organization of this meeting itself, and no African state voted for that. And this statement continues saying that Ethiopia will not cooperate with the team that was formed as it was imposed on it. Its human rights situation is an internal affair. The international community is expected to work with us, but going to be allowed in Ethiopia will not cooperate. So generally speaking, Richard, Ethiopia is unhappy and it will not cooperate according to this statement.
All right, Garum, that leads me nicely into my next question. Speaking of the North, what is the situation right now in the North? Can you give us an overview of that situation?
Richard, unfortunately, war continues in the north between the Ethiopian National Defense Force, other armed force under the Prime Minister's, leadership, who was there a few days back and now is in Turkey for the Turkey-Africa meeting. And that mission in the north is continuing. The TPLF force are also fighting against the government force, but they are being pushed further away by the day. Last night we have heard the breaking news, the last stronghold called Woldia, which is located in the border town, in the border between the Amhara and the Tigray regional state, is now a strategic location where war is intensified. In the next few hours, the NDF is saying that they will finish the job of taking the forces of the Tigray away from the Amhara regional state. They have already done that job of freeing lands of the Afar regional state. So war has now come to narrow places in the Amhara and Tigray regional state border towns. And on the other hand, Richard, we should report that airstrikes have continued. TPLF is saying civilians have been affected. The government is saying that strategic military locations were the ones being targeted, and it was a successful mission. So generally speaking, war is in continuation in the north.
Garum Chal in Addis Ababa, thank you so much for that update and report. On to the Indian Ocean island of Madagascar now, where 6 people have been convicted of attempted murder of President Andry Rajoelina. A high court in the capital, Antananarivo, has sentenced the 6 to 20 years in jail with hard labor. Among the convicts include former advisor to the president, Paulo Rafano Harana, a retired Malagasy army general, and Philippe Francois, a former officer in the French military. Other charges they faced include plotting to overthrow the government and criminal association with a view to threatening the president's life. They have been in custody since July this year, though the details of the attempted murder plot have not been made public. Lawyers have said that they would appeal the ruling in a higher court, and President Andry Rajoelina has been in power since 2009 following an overthrow of former President Marc Ravalomanana. Well, in news just in from the Philippines now, the death toll from the super Typhoon Rai has risen to 33. Typhoon Rai made landfall on Thursday. It was one of the strongest tropical storms to strike the nation this year. Over 300,000 people were displaced. Homes were damaged and power lines collapsed. Most deaths were caused by fallen trees and drowning. President Rodrigo Duterte says he will visit the battered central and southern areas today to assess the damage as the government prepares funds for disaster response. You are watching Africa Live. The news continues. We'll see you on the other side of the break with more news stories. Stay tuned. Here's what's ahead. Tunisia marks 11 years since the Arab Spring as her neighbors Libya and Sudan struggle to find their footing.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Thanks for staying with us. On the 17th of December 2010, an uprising broke out in Tunisia when Mohamed Bouazizi, a vegetable salesman angered by police harassment, set himself ablaze. 4 weeks later, after vast nationwide protests, veteran longtime ruler Zine al-Abidine Ben Ali fled into exile on January the 14th, which later became an official day of remembrance and a public holiday. On the anniversary of the uprising, Adnan Chouachi reports on how Tunisians feel their country has fared since that crucial day.
Some Tunisians celebrated President Said's decision to move the official anniversary of the Tunisian Revolution from January 14th to December 17th, when the revolution explosion burst out of the town of Sidi Bouzid.
I'm celebrating the revolution anniversary because the country is so much better than it was before 2010. Yes, there are many challenges and difficulties, but we are proud of our country and proud of our popular revolution. We are optimistic about the future.
Many people believe that the main objectives of the 2011 popular uprising have not been achieved. Critics say the successive governments and presidents have failed to put an end to the political, security, economic and social crisis in the country.
Nothing has changed in Tunisia because 11 years after the revolution, the country is still going through an ideological war instead of focusing on the economic and social priorities. The population has been impoverished. There's nothing to celebrate on this day.
Tunisia's powerful labor union urged the president and the prime minister to focus on improving the socio-economic situation in all regions.
The revolution started to address social needs. Bouazizi set himself on fire for socio-economic reasons and not for political motivations. Let's learn from our past mistakes and build a better future for Tunisia. Unfortunately, the situation is getting worse and the demands of the people have not been met yet.
The families of victims of the popular uprising are still calling for justice. More than 300 people died and 3,000 were injured during the unrest in the North African state. Observers assert that for the 6th consecutive year, Tunisian youths who made the revolution have not celebrated its anniversary. A recent study has shown that more than 90% of youths are desperate and plan to leave the country. Adnan Chouachi, CGTN, Tunis.
From Tunisia, a series of anti-government protests, uprisings, and armed rebellions spread across much of the Arab world in the early 2010, forming what is referred to as the Arab Spring. Now, some of the affected countries like Libya, Sudan, and Algeria are still feeling the ripples. From North Africa, let's bring in our reporters Adel Al-Mahroui joining us live from Cairo, and Adnan Chouachi, who is in Tunis. Gentlemen, both of you, welcome to Africa Live. Thank you for your time. Let's begin with you, Adel. Libya's election is now in doubt just a week before the expected date. Sudan is still having protests even as late as yesterday. How has the Arab Spring proven to be both a blessing and a curse for these countries, Adel?
Well, if we start with Libya, Libya is one of the countries where the leadership there, President Muammar Gaddafi, has been very resistant to comply with the change that the popular masses have been calling for. And that has led to great division in the country, violent one, of course. And in 2016, that turned into direct civil war between Libyan factions. Now, up until just, as you said, 1 week to the elections, that is
Well, we apologize for that breaking communication. Hopefully we'll get Adel a little later on. Let's now turn our attention to Adnan. Adnan, hopefully you can hear me. Adnan, Tunisia is now looking to reform its constitution and have elections next year. Its neighbor Algeria was also affected by the Arab Spring. How are things in Algeria, Adnan?
Richard, the situation is stable in Algeria. Algerian President Abdelmajid Tebboune was in Tunisia for a two-day state visit, his first state visit to the North African neighbor. The situation is stable in Algeria, but I do believe that, and many analysts, Algerian analysts in particular, believe that the COVID-19 crisis has had an impact on the situation in the region, because protesters could no longer go to the streets, could no longer take to the streets to protest, to gather, and their opposition or their movements were mainly organized online. The situation, the political and the security situation is very stable in Algeria, but just like in Tunisia and many other countries in the region, youths have demands like employment, improving the economic and the social situation, and this will probably take time, several years, to improve the social and the economic situation in Algeria and in the region in general. When the situation is unstable in Algeria, it affects Tunisia. When it's unstable in Tunisia, it affects Algeria. That's why President Kais Saied and Algerian President Abdelmajid Tebboune have agreed to strengthen and deepen ties between the two countries, especially on the security and in the security and economic sectors, as well as in the health sectors.
All right, Adnan, thank you for that update. Important points that you've made there. Let's attempt to bring Adel Al-Mahroui back into the conversation. Adel, I hope you can hear me this time. Adel, glad to have you back. You were telling us how the Arab Spring has proven to be both a blessing and a curse for these countries. Please continue.
Well, Richard, if you see, take a look at what happened in the Arab world, the more resistance you've seen from the leadership, the longer the transition has become and the deadlier it has become. There was more or less compliance in Egypt, where former President Hosni Mubarak stepped down. In Tunisia, we've seen the same, and in Algeria as well, and in Sudan. Sudan is the freshest and still going on through major transition. There is still some shift in Algeria, but these are the countries that have somewhat crossed the violence. But when you look at Libya, in Syria and in Yemen, for example, where there has been much resistance to the calls and to the protests, that has turned to a long-lasting, in many cases, a very violent confrontation between two factions. So that is one of the major downsides. But beside that, if you take a look at Egypt, for instance, it has been a cycle where former President Hosni Mubarak, from a military background, stepped down, and then after 3 or 4 years, another military leader.
Well, we appear to have lost Adel again. We have to fix that, but hopefully we have Adnan still on the line. Adnan, are you there? Adnan, what about in your country, Tunisia? How do the majority feel about the impact of the uprising there?
Mm-hmm. Richard, everything started here in Tunisia on December 17, 2010, and then what is now being described as the Arab Spring kicked off in many other countries in the whole region. At the beginning, it was a peaceful protest in Tunisia. People were unarmed, and they took to the streets to call for justice, to call for jobs, for employment, for better living conditions. But let's remember that more than 300 Tunisians died during the 2011 popular uprising, and more than 3,000 people were injured. And the families are still calling for justice more than 11 years after the popular revolution in Tunisia. The answer about the situation in Tunisia and about the result of the popular revolution is very simple. It comes from the Mediterranean, with the waves of irregular migrants who are crossing the Mediterranean illegally to reach the Italian island of Lampedusa and to reach European shores. More and more people, hundreds, thousands of people, are trying to leave the country. Before 2010, they were mainly unskilled irregular migrants, unskilled young people, but after the revolution, and especially over the past few years, they had become, we have witnessed a new wave of migration with women, children, kids, as well as skilled migrants and university graduates. These people who
were protesting to call for jobs, to call for more opportunities in the inner regions were not heard by, their voices were not heard by politicians. More than 10 governments in Tunisia after 2010, more than four presidents in the country, but things have not changed. President Kais Saied has promised to change the situation, to improve the situation, but his opponents describe his grip of power as illegal, as they describe it, as a coup, but the president says he's defending the 2011 revolution. So now the street remains divided. In 2010, people were united, working together, defending the same cause, but now the street is divided, the public opinion is divided between those who support the president and his approach towards defending the 2011 revolution, and those who are against the president's approach, but who are still defending the democratic transition, the democratic process in Tunisia, and calling for the return to representative democracy in the country. President Saied was under pressure from the EU and from many other countries to announce his agenda for elections, for reforming the constitution. No one knows how this will happen. The president said this will go online and that he will gather a group of specialists and experts in constitutional law who will do the job, but people fear that this will be done by a very limited number of experts and people who are close to President Saied, and this will not reflect the will and the demands of the people. President Saied, on the other side, defends himself, saying that he's here to defend the will of the people and that he came to power to realize the objectives of the 2011 revolution. The real answer is in the streets. The real answer is in the regions where people are still calling for jobs, are still calling for dignity, are still calling for more opportunities and better living conditions, better economic and social conditions 11 years after the 2011 popular uprising in the North African country.
All right, Adnan, thank you for bringing all of that there to light with your analysis. I'd like to thank Adel Mahroui as well. We couldn't reestablish sustained communication, but we appreciate your time. Gentlemen, both of you, thank you for your time. Let's now turn our attention to Cameroon, where intercommunal violence has caused thousands to flee their homes. Many have fled to Chad, while others stayed in Cameroon, according to the UNHCR. Now, so far, 44 people have been killed in the fighting and over 100 injured. Astatal has the details.
The fighting began earlier this month in northern Cameroon. Clashes erupted between farmers, herders, and fishermen over dwindling resources.
The clashes initially broke out in early December, following disputes between herders, fishermen, and farmers over dwindling water resources. The climate crisis is, of course, exacerbating the competition for resources, especially water. The surface of Lake Chad has decreased by as much as 95% in the past 60 years.
The conflict has led to at least 100,000 people fleeing from their homes. UNHCR estimates over 85,000 people have so far gone to Chad.
Intercommunal clashes that erupted in Cameroon's far north region in the past 2 weeks have driven at least 100,000 people from their homes, although the real number may be much higher. We estimate that more than 85,000 people have fled into neighboring Chad in recent days, while at least 15,000 Cameroonians have been forced from home inside their country. Since humanitarian access in the area is very limited, these totals may in fact be much higher.
Majority of the new arrivals to Chad were children, with women accounting for 98% of adult arrivals, according to the UNHCR.
Refugees are in dire need of shelter, blankets, mats, and hygiene kits. Some are being generously hosted by local communities, but most are still sleeping out in the open or under trees.
The UNHCR says it's working with the Cameroonian government on reconciliation efforts. Astatal, CGTN.
The International Organization for Migration and the World Health Organization are calling upon governments to enable migrants to access COVID-19 vaccines. The call comes as the world marks International Migrants Day today. Addressing the press from Geneva, International Organization boss Jacqueline Weekers said equitable access to health care is still insufficient.
As As I speak, millions of asylum seekers, forcibly displaced families and migrant workers are cut off from reliable health coverage. Millions of migrants in irregular situations face arrest or deportation when seeking healthcare due to the absence of firewalls with immigration authorities. Equitable access to health services remains insufficient, and stigma and discrimination against migrants widespread, as evidenced by the media reports following the discovery of the Omicron variant.
The Democratic Republic of Congo's declaration of the end of its latest Ebola outbreak in the east of the country has sparked a lot of excitement among Congolese citizens. The announcement was made by the country's health minister on Thursday. 11 people were infected with Ebola and 6 of them died in the country's 13th outbreak in the last 4 decades. CGTN's Chris Ochimringa sent this report from Kinshasa.
Congolese authorities have declared the country free of Ebola after going for 42 days without recording a new case in the eastern territory of Beni. The outbreak was announced on October 8th after a 3-year-old boy tested positive. It was reported in the same area where a major Ebola outbreak happened in 2018. Many Congolese citizens are happy the latest Ebola outbreak has ended in a volatile part of the country.
Many of our fellow citizens have been dying of gunshots fired by armed groups in the east of the country. I felt very sad when I heard about the Ebola outbreak there, but I'm now happy that the disease has been declared to be over.
En tant que Congolais, premièrement, je dirais d'abord merci à Dieu.
I thank God for bringing us this good news at the end of the year. I've never been to that part of our country, but I have seen images on TV of the suffering that people have gone through because of the Ebola virus.
The World Health Organization and several other aid agencies played an important role in supporting the DRC government to end the outbreak.
We've got now capacity to detect quickly, to stop the spread of the disease, and even to kill the disease. There is a new medicine, Ebanga, produced by Professor Muyembe against Ebola, and we use also the vaccine Everbo, who is the one used for vaccinated people. It was, now it's a relief. Now we are happy to see that it's finished.
Ebola is endemic in the DRC. The country has had 13 outbreaks since the disease was first discovered in 1976. The country's worst outbreak occurred between 2018 and 2020 in North Kivu province. It claimed nearly 2,300 lives. Scientists say the disease is transmitted to humans through infected bushmeat such as bats and monkeys. Authorities have put in place surveillance teams in Beni and its surrounding areas to ensure flare-ups don't happen in future. The latest Ebola outbreak in eastern DRC has been contained faster than a previous outbreak in the region thanks to the lessons the country has learnt in dealing with the infectious disease. Health experts have urged the public to stop eating wild animals that spread the Ebola virus, but that may not be easy to achieve in many remote parts of the DRC. Chris Ochimringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
You're watching Africa Live. We appreciate your company. Ghana has introduced a 1.75% levy on electronic transactions. That levy comes into effect on the 1st of February 2022. It covers mobile money payments, bank transfers, merchant payments, and inward remittances. Ridwan Karim Dina Osman reports from Accra.
Salome Ayete has been a mobile money vendor for 11 years. It's her only source of livelihood. She says the government's new tax on mobile money and all electronic transactions could threaten her source of income.
It will not help us because people already, they are complaining that if they bring that and they will not do mobile money again. The business will collapse and it will affect us.
The government is introducing a 1.75% tax on mobile money payments and electronic bank transfers called e-levy to shore up revenue generation. Ghana has more than 42 million mobile money accounts, according to the government's data. But like Ayete, many Ghanaians are against it.
When you're going to send money to someone, we see the charges to be high already. And we complain, even with the normal one. So them adding more to it, it's going to be complicated.
When you collect a tax and you don't make good use of it, I don't see why the tax should be collected. Go to the interland. People are suffering.
Ghana's central bank says there are more than 19 million active mobile money accounts driving the digital financial services industry. The government says the e-levy is part of strategies to widen the country's tax net. It believes revenue generated from the levy will enhance financial inclusion and protect the vulnerable. The government says part of the money raised from the e-levy will be used to support entrepreneurship, youth employment, digital and road infrastructure. But analysts fear these additional taxes could overburden citizens and also slow down the cashless drive in Ghana. They think the tax should be lowered.
What has happened in other countries is that when these things have happened, you find out that people have gone back to cash. And then government has not been able to raise the revenue, and then jobs have been lost, when even they've gone back and reduce it, the uptake has not gone back to what it was before then. We thought that something between 0.25 and 0.5 would have been a good one.
Salome Ayete agrees. She believes a downward adjustment of the tax will help prevent her business from collapsing. Ridwan Karim Dini Osman, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Digital analysts in Nigeria are urging authorities to strengthen collaboration with fintech firms to boost the volume of cashless transactions. As Tessa McKinday now reports, the government has introduced digital payments in the last few months to deter demand for physical cash and slow inflation.
Chukwunonso Nwafo owns a wine shop in Jos, north-central Nigeria. He says he prefers cash transactions as opposed to digital payments while dealing with his customers.
It's a personal decision based on the experience I have in the past, where I get fake credit and I get a lot. But when I get to the bank or when I go through my statement of account, I find that the money is in there. So to be on the safer side, I prefer cash so that I know I have my money intact. Ongoing now, one has to be very careful.
Chukwunonso is just one of many other people in Nigeria who still prefer cash transactions in the age of digitization. The country's central bank says the amount of cash in circulation in the country increased 4.6% in October from the previous month. It adds that 36% of the adult population lacks access to banking services.
Most of us, we just don't trust the government or like any centralized organization to take care of our transaction that particular way. Apart from trust, one other major factor that we have is literacy. For you to carry out, for you to actually work on a cashless, for the cashless economy to actually really work, and for you to actually have up to at least let's say maybe like 80% success, you need to have people that actually knows how to use this digital media.
Digital analysts want the government to put in more efforts to boost cashless transactions and digital payments in the country.
Government have to work hand in hand and with all these fintech organizations. They need to collaborate and say, okay, how can we make this cashless policy better for the masses? And also, they need to learn to work well with the telco provider.
The government says it is committed to the push for a cashless economy and growth of digital payments. In October, President Muhammadu Buhari launched eNaira, Nigeria's central bank digital currency, which is expected to expand digital payments and deepen financial inclusion. About 500,000 people as of mid-November had already enrolled on the platform. With such innovations, it is hoped that citizens like Chukwunonso will embrace digital payments over cash transactions, which the government says will help reduce inflation in the country. Tassim Akende, CGTN Jos, Nigeria.
And we are not done just yet. We've got your sports news coming up after the break. Here's what's ahead.